Hey there, welcome to today's episode where we talk about 1990s mafia classic Goodfellas.
Stick around to find out why we think Joe Pesci's a funny guy.
I'm Peter,
And I'm Shay, and you're listening to
Stellar Alignment. Welcome to episode 10. We're talking Goodfellas, another Martin Scorsese joint, also co-written by Scorsese and Nicholas Pileggi, I think that's how you say his name, who co-wrote Casino with Martin Scorsese. So there's tons and tons and tons of comparisons
We're going to
between
draw a lot of parallels.
this and Goodfellas by many people, and we can see why, because it was written by two of the same people.
Yep.
Starring Ray Liotta, Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, Frank Vincent, Lorraine Bracco, Paul Sorvino, among numerous other people that we won't list. A total of 27 alumni from
that we see in The Sopranos.
Yes,
on HBO.
A lot of people who only just happen to be in a passing scene that end up being like big characters in The Sopranos.
It's exciting to see.
We see Paulie in the beginning of the movie, very small role. We see Big Pussy in passing, doesn't have any lines. We just kind of see the side of his head. Christopher, of course, plays Spider.
Yeah.
Who's hilariously killed. Not so much hilarious in The Sopranos, but hilariously killed in Goodfellas.
No, not hilariously.
It's pretty funny.
There are funny things.
It's meant to be
right around that same. It was funny.
It's a little messed up, but it's also funny.
It was pretty funny.
As far back as I can remember, I wanted to be a gangster.
Tons of great quotes.
Tons of great
ones.
One of the first ones of the film.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So the intro itself reminded me of Casino a lot. We kind of start in the middle, not at the end like Casino, but then we immediately get this narration of a lot of exposition, a lot of flashbacks to the beginning.
We even freeze frame. It's the beginning of Casino. De Niro's walking out to his car, gets in, it blows up, and still frame on the explosion, and in comes De Niro with his narration. When you love someone, you got to trust them. There's no other way. You got to give them the key to everything that's yours. Otherwise, what's the point? Right?
Yeah.
Loves to start the films on a very strong line.
Very fun.
And same thing with this. As far back as I can remember, I wanted to be a gangster. It freezes on Ray Liotta as he closes the trunk after Pesci, gives Frank Vincent a couple more jabs in the face.
And then De Niro shoots him a couple times.
Yeah. And you've got
the
red lights of the brakes kind of shining on them, which is kind of a cool lighting effect.
Then we do get sucked into his intro to the gang.
Then we go back in time, and it's like the 1950s.
Yes.
Right?
He's a kid. He lives directly next door to a mob hangout, which hard not to get involved,
sucked into that.
And he starts his first part-time job there, parking cars when he's really young.
Yeah.
And he just observes everything that's happening in there. He loves it. He can't think of any other thing he wants to do.
Yeah, the first thing he does when he gets a little bit of money is goes out and buys a ridiculous suit that a mobster of that time would wear. And that's what his mother says. You look like a mobster.
He volunteers for more and more work. He's always there to run errands. He's absorbing everything that they have to teach him.
He's a real go-getter.
He is. He's an entrepreneur. Absolutely.
Yeah. Makes himself useful. Makes himself indispensable.
He makes himself useful, indispensable.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And who doesn't like, this bright young kid hanging around and whatnot? It's very family-oriented.
Well, and Paulie, who's the kind of the boss of this family, takes a liking to him also. Paulie's kind of the strong, silent type that sits back and observes, and he sees that in Henry, I think.
He's calm, but like a go-getter,
Some of
willing to do the work.
the trivia that I read about the real Henry Hill is that he also was kind of reserved and took things in and didn't react kind of like Tommy Pesci's character does.
By the time he's 13 years old, he's doing extra things. Like he stopped going to school. He's breaking windows and cars and blowing stuff up for them as errands or little tasks for him to do. He's like a mini gangster. And he gets pinched for doing one of these tasks.
Yes. It's kind of a big deal because he goes in, I think he gets off, right?
Yes.
They let him slide.
Yes.
And
they don't have anything that they can really...
And De Niro's played Jimmy Conway, Jimmy Burke in real life, the real life character, kind of congratulates him and says, you know, there's two important things in life. You never rat on your friends and you always keep your mouth shut, which to me is actually just one thing.
Those are both the same thing.
If you keep your mouth shut, then you can't rat on your friends. But, yeah.
He exits the courtroom and like all the gangsters are there and they all like congratulate him. Like he just popped his cherry or graduated from high school. Like it's kind of a good feeling.
I think they even say popped his cherry. I think one of
they?
them even mentions that. Yeah.
It's kind of like a nice camaraderie. Like I can see why he wanted to be there, be with them, have that lifestyle.
Right. Pinched selling cigarettes, right?
Yes.
With a young Tommy who's apparently supposed to be the same age as Henry Hill. The adult versions are Ray Liotta and Joe Pesci. Pesci being older than Ray Liotta. Pesci being older than Robert De Niro, actually, in real life. But De Niro's supposed to be, I want to say, like, at least 10 to 15 years older than the two of them. Neither here nor there. I read that Pesci really wanted to play this character. He kind of convinced Scorsese to let him do it, apparently.
He chose a good character, though. He's very volatile, kind of like Pesci. You know, Pesci has really good, like, explosive anger
those
that
are the,
he can do.
We love funny Joe Pesci, but there's a very fine line. If this was a straight comedy, he'd be hilarious the whole movie. He's hilarious most of the movie anyways, and it's not supposed to be funny. It's just like I said a few minutes ago, when he kills Spider, it's hilarious. It's not supposed to be. He murders a kid in cold blood for saying, go fuck yourself.
But he's just funny. The way he delivers certain lines.
Funny how? I think the really good thing about Pesci, this understated fine line between crazy and hilarious, which, you know, I'm not going to bury the lead here. Pesci wins the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. This is his second nomination. He lost for Raging Bull, wins for this one. The only Oscar win for this film. There were 5 other nominations: Best Picture, Director, Editing, I want to say Sound, and then Lorraine Bracco also was nominated for Best Supporting Actor, but Pesci's the only one that won because of this like nuanced performance that he's able to give, and he's love him for it. This like uncaged animal that Pesci is able to play is just so entertaining to watch.
It's super entertaining, and you don't need to believe that he's a big or small guy because of the fire inside.
It's
you know,
the attitude. Yeah,
absolutely.
It could be the first scene that we see of adult Tommy, the funny guy scene, which is a classic scene. Even if you haven't seen Goodfellas, you might know the how am I funny scene because it's just so well known. So
you want to break it down?
Pesci is telling a story, which he does numerous times throughout the film.
Great storyteller.
Telling, an anecdote.
Everyone's surrounding him. They're laughing.
Yeah, and he's being questioned, and the guy that's questioning him says, can you tell me anything? And he says, yeah, go fuck your mother. And it gets uproarious laughter from everyone, especially Ray Liotta.
I have a note here. Why is Ray Liotta laughing like that? He's just like in
is
fits.
Just like almost over the top, but I don't think it's over the top. I think it's because in that scene, he's supposed to find it so fucking funny
Yeah.
that he cannot control himself. These guys get around and they tell these stories about these really shitty things that they do, and they laugh about it, which is even more hilarious. And he tells him, "Oh, you're so funny." Pesci kind of gets real straight and says, what do you mean I'm funny? It evolves into this,
Like this
am I a
confrontation.
clown? Do I think I amuse you? Yada, yada, yada.
Everyone is silent. It's super awkward.
Right.
Ray Liotta is even at a loss for words.
Until finally he realizes, like, oh, it's just a joke.
He's just fucking with me.
And so 2 points I want to make here. The scene was just supposed to be, he says, oh, you're really funny. The ad-libbing, which is done a lot throughout this film, is added in during rehearsals and during the scene itself. Most of the other actors in the scene with Pesci and Ray Liotta don't know the extent of where this interaction is supposed to go. So a lot of their reactions are kind of real in the moment.
Authentic, like, oh shit, mom and dad are fighting at the table.
The other funny thing is it matches perfectly with the character of Tommy, but this actually happened to Pesci in real life when he was a kid, was working at I think a restaurant or something like that, and a similar character told a story, and he thought that he was complimenting the guy by telling him how funny he was, and the guy did the same thing to him. Scorsese loved it and decided to put it in the film. And it's like one of the most quotable parts of the movie or movies of all time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
there it is.
I've definitely heard it other places.
Like Animaniacs
Possibly.
with the pigeons. The pigeons in the
Oh,
park
yeah.
are fully...
So bizarre.
It's fully a ripoff of GoodFellas. I think they're called Goodfeathers.
What?
So, Animaniacs, the cartoon from the mid-90s,
Oh my God.
should be our childhood. We both watched it.
Yep.
I didn't know what it was when I was a kid either, but then grew up and learned what Goodfellas was. And was like, oh, that's funny. There's a De Niro character, and then there's a Pesci character, and then there's Ray Liotta character. And it's always the same gag, is the Pesci character gets all worked up. Yeah.
I want to make a couple parallels, but Pesci's character here and Casino seem very similar.
It's a very similar character.
Very similar.
Like,
I think maybe
unhinged.
funnier here, but
Yeah.
maybe a little more charming, or maybe he's just more in his element and not everyone has those reservations. Okay, so in Casino, we have De Niro's character who did have some reservations about some violence and criminal activity.
Yeah, De Niro in Goodfellas is not a good guy. He's... Yeah.
Exactly. I feel like everyone else is on par with him violent-wise and thinking certain things and acts are okay.
Yeah.
And so he doesn't seem so far-fetched or so unhinged compared to everything else
Right.
in this one. And maybe that's why he's a more likable character.
Possibly. I mean, in Casino, he stabs a guy in the neck with a pen because he told his friend to go fuck himself. In Goodfellas, he shoots a kid who he already shot once. He tells Tommy himself, Pesci, to go fuck himself, and he kills him for it, you know? So, I don't know. I get where you're going.
Yeah.
That but it is a very similar character, and I think that's one of the many reasons when Casino came out, they're like, "What? This is just Goodfellas in Las Vegas." It's not. Like they're two completely different movies. We're talking about this before we started rolling, but we both like Goodfellas better.
Yes.
I thoroughly enjoy Casino, but I think Goodfellas just has more of a story, and I care more about the characters than I did in Casino.
I did too.
And I think that's because, and Scorsese admitted, that there was no plot or story in Casino. You kind of just follow this sequence of events happening, and it's fully narrated throughout the film. We get a decent amount of narration in this film, but not as much. And I think that's because I like to think that this film is kind of broken up into 3 acts, where the first act of the film is following Henry as a child and then as a young man as he kind of moves up the ranks as an associate to the mob. And also we get his introduction to Karen, Lorraine Bracco, who we can get into eventually. And then throughout that whole first act, him and her do a pretty heavy amount of narrating
Yeah.
to give us like the nuts and bolts of what it's like in the
And
mafia.
their relationship
And
and
yeah.
how everything is so normalized. So I'm going back to that same point I made earlier, where maybe Joe Pesci's behavior is not so unhinged and crazy in this movie compared to the Casino, because everyone else is at that level of violence.
Sure.
So Karen, in one of her narrations, she says we don't hang out with anyone else, or I'm paraphrasing, of course. They're very close with all the people they do hang out with, right? It's all the same people and the same wives, the same friends, the same mobsters. You don't go outside because it's unsafe to talk to those people.
Exactly.
But in that case, you're in like this
Bubble.
bubble.
Yeah. Not the word
Echo
you're
chamber.
looking for. Sure.
You're
echo
in this
chamber.
echo chamber of
Where-
all the things
where
that
crime is normalized.
where it's normalized, where the violence is normalized.
I guess that makes sense because in Casino, De Niro is trying to be legitimate, and the whole time he's trying to get Nikki to not, ruin
Two, like,
his legitimate
conflicting
thing.
sides.
And Nikki doesn't give a fuck, and he's just acting like a mobster. So yeah, I get it. Like, there's nothing to play Nikki against in Casino like there is here. Everyone here is killing people and robbing and doing whatever, but not as much in Casino. I get that. That makes sense.
Yeah. So let's talk about Karen.
Yeah, let's talk about Karen. Karen's a nice Jewish girl who he's originally not interested in. He goes on a date with Tommy just as a favor to Tommy because Tommy wants to take out this other Jewish girl, but she won't go out with Italians because prejudice against Italians. Can you believe it in this day and age?
Aw.
That's a quote from the movie. They go on a double date, but Henry's not interested at all.
Super bored.
And the next date, he stands her up, and she doesn't like it, and she finds him and out in front of all of his buddies and calls him out.
Yep.
Pulls him out.
And that's when he suddenly sees her.
Interested. Yes.
Because she's crazy enough to come pull up on him.
Mm-hmm.
He is interested.
Well, and then they share that trait that they like within each other because once he takes her on a legitimate date and takes her through the back entrance of the Copacabana, she realizes how
Connected
important he is. Of course, he says he's a construction, he's a union delegate.
And he's supposed to be 21 at this time.
When she asks, yeah. But she realizes, okay, this guy has some sort of power, at least.
Everybody wants to be his friend, and he knows how to handle it.
And then, she runs into someone she knows, and then the next scene, she calls him, and this guy has roughed her up a little bit, and Henry takes care of it for her. He walks across the street and pistol whips the fuck out of him, and
Points his gun around at them a little bit.
Asked Karen to hide the gun, and she said, most women at this point would probably get out of there, but I have to be honest, it turned me on. So they share that trait within each other.
Yeah, they're both maybe a little crazy.
Yeah. And I did have a note here that at their wedding, when Paulie takes her around to introduce him to his family, everyone's either named Peter or Paul, and all the daughters' names are Marie.
All the wives' names are Marie.
The wives' names.
And the daughters, yeah.
Everyone's name's Marie.
Everybody's named Marie.
So my name's Peter. My sister's middle name's Marie. There's like a 50% chance that your middle name's going to be Marie.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I don't get it.
Is that an Italian thing?
Sure.
Or like an
I don't
East
know.
Coast thing?
Both. I don't know. I'm only a fraction of an Italian, so not really a good source to ask that. We should mention, of course, we've got Scorsese, De Niro, and Pesci. We also need some Frank Vincent.
Of course.
Frank Vincent appears.
Boom, there he is.
As Billy Bats. Doesn't have a very big role in this one. Smaller than he had in Raging Bull.
He just plays a bad guy.
Yep. Who just was released from prison and knows Tommy from when he was younger. Another very classic scene and quotable scene of where he tells Tommy to go home and get his fucking shine box. Because Tommy used to shine the hell out of a shoe. Of course, Tommy is very offended by this.
Because he's
A little
grown
bit.
up
Little-
now.
You you offended him a little bit. A little bit.
That was good to know.
Oh, thanks. You probably do it better.
Mm,
You do
okay.
the face, and I'll do the voice, and then we'll make one good De Niro impression. Tommy, being kind of the loose cannon that he is, doesn't take this offense well and ends up killing a made man.
Yes.
And this is where
With Jimmy's help.
we
Jimmy
circle back.
helps
Yeah,
stop
see
him.
that De Niro, I mean, he gets worse throughout the movie, but he's not a good guy either, and
Nah.
he kills people left and right. So different than his character from Casino. I do want to talk about similarities once we get there to his character in Casino, but this is where we get brought back to the beginning of the film.
Yes.
They kill him, they stuff him in Ray Liotta's trunk, and they end up stopping for dinner at Tommy's mom's house.
Well,
in
they
the
go
trunk.
for a shovel.
And
Tommy's mom
mother,
is-
played by Catherine Scorsese, Martin Scorsese's mother, wakes up, makes them all dinner, like a good Italian mother tends to do. And
It's the middle of the night.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm hungry.
apparently the majority of that scene is also ad-libbed. Him asking for the knife that he ends up killing her, it wasn't,
I'm
I
gonna
guess,
borrow this.
part of the scene either. And then on the way to burying him, he wakes up and they have to stop and stab him and shoot him a few more times. And that's where
Yeah.
the film begins. They get themselves into trouble quite a bit, but they're also, fun-loving. It's all about partying and spending their money. The real Henry Hill didn't do well at saving his money. He'd make it and then spend it or gamble it away most of the time. Not really financially sound people that live that lifestyle. They all had their share of girlfriends,
Including Henry.
including Henry, and
It seemed like he
Karen-
bought his girlfriend an apartment.
her own apartment. Yeah, a fuck pad for the two of them.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Karen's paranoid?
Karen
She
knows. All the wives know that they have a Gumar, so she kind of loses it on him and pulls a gun on him.
Yeah.
That's another
That happens.
famous scene where Ray Liotta's like, "I gotta come home
To this?
for this," and this is where the family comes into play because Paulie wants to try and help set things straight.
I was like, oh. Because I was like, oh, what a good family dynamic. They're talking to him about his marriage and how he should go home. Or,
Well, it's a family, right? The
Yeah.
mafia is essentially, and for the people that are made men, you're part of this family. And from any of the TV or movies that I've watched about the mafia, it's almost
all
even,
we've learned on TV.
it's thicker than blood,
Yep. So, wives are very important. And, your children are very important.
Yeah.
Regardless of if you have multiple girlfriends.
Yeah, Saturdays are for girlfriends. That's in the movie. You got it right here.
Son of a bitch.
Saturdays are for girlfriends. Paulie sends Henry on a job with Jimmy down to Tampa, and where
Kind of give them a break.
they rough up a guy, and they end up getting
In trouble.
in trouble, and this is when they get sent to jail for
Yes.
a little bit.
So Polly, Jimmy, and Henry go to prison
Yeah.
for a varying amount of time.
This is kind of where I'd like to say that Act 1 kind of ends and Act 2 starts to begin. When they go to prison, I feel like Act 2 begins.
Yeah.
We also lose a lot of the narration here. The narration's kind of done because we've been given the setup of what it's like to live in the family, and now we're following this story
Storyline.
of Henry getting arrested, going to jail. We also should note that there's a fourth member in their cell there who was already in prison, who's Martin Scorsese's father.
Oh.
While they're there, Karen is still suspicious because his girlfriends are coming to visit,
Yeah.
and she's bringing him sneaking stuff into the jail to
Good
give him good cheeses, but also
bread,
drugs.
meats,
He
drugs.
starts selling drugs while he's in prison to make a little extra money.
Quietly.
And once he gets out, continues to, even though Paulie tells him to
Polly tells
stay
him
the hell away
to
from
stay
it.
away from that sort of thing. Because that's what can bring you down. That's traceable. And
After the beginning of Act 2, when Henry's released and he starts selling drugs, there's also wind of this heist that could happen, which is a real life thing, one of the biggest heists of all time, the Luf- Lufthansa
I don't know how to pronounce it.
Lufthansa heist, which in real life was just shy of $6 million, was stolen, but was apparently orchestrated by Jimmy Burke in real life, Jimmy Conway, De Niro's character, and yeah, the people that were involved in this,
It's a pretty big group of people that
mm-hmm,
they introduced us to. A little bit
including,
of narration here.
yeah, we get a little bit of context here, but eventually end up getting killed too.
Yeah, well, it starts off for reasons. Stax is the first person who gets killed.
Played by Samuel L. Jackson.
Yes, he stole the truck. He was supposed to get rid of it or hide it, and he didn't do his job.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, they found it. They said they found prints, and eventually it would lead back to him, so they killed him.
Which really happened. This is exactly what happened. A real person with the nickname Stax didn't get rid of the truck, and it was found, and then from that, on top of the other key players who were part of the heist spending money that they shouldn't have been
That they
spending
shouldn't have been
because
spending.
it raises red flags. Jimmy just decides I need to.
I need to start cutting these loose ends.
Yep.
And starts going ham.
And like we're talking killing people that in the scene before they were just playing poker together and laughing and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or
who have been in every single poker game with them
or
up until
like,
this point.
You know, when they kill Maury, the annoying guy who's the wig salesman, who's also a part of it. Apparently, he's the one I think that let them in on it.
He's
right?
the one who tipped them off on it.
They kill him.
But he's got a big mouth and he's super annoying.
One of the guys in the car when they kill him ends up getting killed himself. Forget the character's name, but
the guy
with the kind of
the eyebrows,
the fro, yeah. Who gets left in the
but he was
truck.
Also one of those people right away that was called out for spending an exorbitant amount of money.
Yeah,
like it's hard to control people.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
This is what I mean. Is like Jimmy. This is where De Niro's character is different from Casino. He's at least in Casino, his character is trying to be legit. Ace is trying to be a legit character. Here, he doesn't care. In fact, in the beginning of the movie, Henry talks about how much Jimmy loves to rob. He loves to steal things. Yeah. And in this movie, he's not a good guy, but at this point is where he really starts to become paranoid. And this is where I think that there are parallels to Casino and also Raging Bull, where we see De Niro's character transition into more of this paranoid person who doesn't trust the people that he's closest to. It happens in Raging Bull where he stops trusting his brother and his wife. It happens in Casino where he stops trusting his wife and Pesci. And it happens again here.
I think it happens whenever he has something to lose, you know, maybe something worth losing. He gets very paranoid and possessive.
And there's a lot of money to be lost here, too.
Absolutely.
And he's probably also thinking, like, the more people I kill, the more money for me. Because Jimmy, at least the picture that they kind of paint in this film is that Jimmy, Henry, and Tommy are thick as thieves.
Yes.
That they kind of...
Three Musketeers.
They'll have each other's backs no matter what. And in fact, when word comes down that Tommy's going to become a made man, especially Jimmy is so very happy because the way he looks at it is if Tommy becomes made, that means he's pretty much made. Even though he and Henry can't because they're
not full Italian.
Pesci's character is full Italian. Pesci in real life is full Italian. De Niro also in real life not full Italian. He thinks they've made it.
His win is their win.
Right.
Like they're going up together.
Right. The problem is that the skeletons in Tommy's past come back. People have found out that he killed Billy Batts. Among the other things, because he's such a loose cannon, he's getting himself into trouble and, doesn't kind of follow the rules the way that you should if you're going to be part of a mob family. They take him to the house where they're going to have the ceremony because there's a ceremony when you become made. They open the door, there's no one there, and it's great because In that moment, Tommy
He's like,
realizes,
oh,
like, oh no, and then Jimmy finds out and is very upset.
he's very distraught.
Yeah.
And there's very little even said. Like, the words don't actually come out like
Yeah, well, these
he's
are,
dead. It's like, we did everything we could.
yeah, we did everything we could, and then he's
And that
gone.
was it.
Of
Yeah,
course,
he
they're on the
knew.
phone, right? So they
Yeah,
never want to say things on the phone. So it's like,
true.
yeah, we did everything we could, but yeah, he's gone. He's gone. And it's
It's,
like, yeah, they whacked him. And it feels like at this point is where Act Two kind of comes to an end, right? Because now Tommy's gone. All of these other guys have been killed, and now it's just kind of Jimmy and Henry, and they're still earners, but they can't be made guys, and their close friend is gone.
yeah.
And at this point, Henry's very much into selling, but also doing drugs.
Yeah.
Karen's involved. He's got some of his girlfriends involved,
Two of
and
his
this
girlfriends.
brings us to Act Three, where it follows this one day. This is where we get the narration that comes back in pretty strong, where
It's a
Henry,
recount of the
yeah,
day,
Henry's
mostly.
kind of narrating us through his day, and apparently a lot of this stuff is even verbatim. Nicholas Pileggi interviewed the real Henry Hill very much, and apparently a lot of what he said is used verbatim in the movie for narration. So, there's this whole list of things he has to do this day, and it starts out with these helicopters, which he
Hmm.
thinks are following him, and, a sequence of events, him picking up his brother and picking up the quote unquote babysitter, which is actually a mule to get the drugs from here to there. Doesn't do what she's
Yeah.
supposed to, and
Like the mistakes that happen along the way.
yeah,
And
and yeah, it leads us to him being arrested
yes.
for something that Paulie told him never to do, and of course Jimmy, who's kind of out on his own now because he's got no one left, sort of, is also worried about the heist and all that money, and Henry kind of rolling over.
Not just that, Jimmy is involved in this drug thing too.
Mm,
Like Henry pulled in Jimmy and Tommy,
that's right.
obviously, because it was becoming a little too big for him and he needed help. So he pulled in his like two guys, his two best friends. I do want to circle back a little bit to this one day, and all his to-do list was manic. And like you saw his face and how he was like sweating the whole time.
Well,
He
he's
just
super
circles,
drugged up too.
nose was red, and he's just like, even the thoughts in his head were manic. He would be like staring at the helicopter, and he's then like, he's got to start cooking. He's got to go mix the thing, but then he's got to leave, and then he's got to come back and start the sauce. But don't put his brother in charge of the sauce. And then it
Yeah.
was just like so manic.
He was right to be paranoid because he ends up getting arrested at the end of the day. The police go to search. Karen flushes it all down the toilet because she's worried they're going to find it, and then that's real evidence,
Yeah,
$60,000 worth.
absolutely.
So when he gets out, he has nothing. He can't go to Paulie because Paulie told him not to do this. They haven't.
He does go to Polly and like
Well, yeah,
apologizes,
but
but
he
Polly
really,
basically
yeah.
is like,
He gives him
I'm turning my back
a
on
few
you.
$1,000 and is like, that's all I can do for you. That's it. He doesn't think that he can really trust Jimmy because Jimmy assumes that he's gonna rat. So that's a very delicate situation.
In fact, yeah, there's something that Jimmy says, and he's like, and that's when I knew I'd never come back from this trip.
Yeah, he wants
That
to
Jimmy wants to send
take him
him
on a job down to Florida again
to go help whack a guy.
Yeah, and he knew that it's like Jimmy has never asked me to kill anybody.
Yeah.
So he knew that something bad was going to happen. And Karen even goes to see Jimmy at one point to ask for a little bit of help. He gives her a couple thousand because they don't have anything. And then he's like, I got some dresses. They're just down the alley in this weird door. And she's getting skeptical. And she kind of thinks that maybe he's going to have her whacked.
Yeah.
So she takes off. And at that point, after they have both interacted with Jimmy, Henry realizes he has no course of action. That he doesn't want a rat, and he never would, but they put in a position where if he doesn't, he's going to be killed.
He's gonna be killed. in or out of jail.
And it's like,
regardless,
yeah,
because of how much he knows.
Sure, he's a rat, but his other course of action was to be killed, because they would have never let him get to a point where he would go through trial because of all of the money from the heist, all of this information that's out there would have never been able to get to trial.
Absolutely.
He goes to witness protection and
Rats on a lot of people.
yeah. And
especially those closest to him. And when he rats on Polly, I'm almost like, oh no.
yeah.
It's like ratting on your own dad.
Kinda. And then they have the courtroom scene where Polly and Jimmy are both there and he has to point them both out. It's so awkward. It's just like, like these guys help raise him.
Shaped him.
Yeah.
Raised him. Gave him a chance.
We have
Gave him a job.
the narration of everything that's going on there, but then it turns into, and this is another parallel to Casino. In Casino, we have the majority of the narration is from Ace, from Robert De Niro, but then Joe Pesci also narrates somewhat throughout the movie.
Mm-hmm.
In the end of the movie, when they take Nicky out to a cornfield right before they kill him, he's narrating up until the point where he gets hit with a baseball bat. And when he gets hit, the narration stops dead, like right there in that moment. I like that, the use of that. Mm-hmm. It's done similarly here, where Henry's narrating and we see the narration of him while he's sitting in the courtroom, and then all of a sudden the next sentence comes directly out of his mouth.
He breaks the fourth wall. He walks out from under, behind where he was.
Mm-hmm.
He's no longer in the scene. He's just reliving what's happening.
Yeah, and
here.
the scene is kind of still going on behind him, but It
was a really cool shot.
Very interesting.
It's a very cool shot.
From there, then we just see him in front of some house, which looks like in the Midwest, picks up a newspaper which says Ohio on it. The one last thing you hear is him close his front door, but it sounds like a jail cell closing, which kind of showing he made
his own prison.
You're not in jail, but you're in witness protection. And also, he no longer gets to live this lifestyle that he loved. And he's kind of in his own prison in the real world.
He's just like everybody else.
Yeah. Credits roll. We get Sid Vicious's version of My Way. Apparently Frank Sinatra would not give Scorsese the rights to play the original version of My Way. A little bit of fun fact there. But also one of 44 or 45 songs throughout the movie. Scorsese's really good at doing this. I do want to mention that it did receive 7 BAFTA nominations, which is quite a few, but it won 5 of those. So best screenplay, costume design, editing, best film, and best director. So did really well over across the pond. It was nominated for 5 Golden Globes, didn't win anything. I usually only try to hit the really big awards that most people have heard, because there's tons of awards that are out there.
Yeah, there's tons of award ceremonies.
There's a lot of improv. So this happens at Casino. We know that a lot of the scenes with De Niro and Pesci are improv. They obviously play well off of each other. That's why Scorsese keeps them together. This is done a lot in GoodFellas also. What would happen a lot of the times is they'd have the scene, they'd rehearse it, and during the rehearsal, if these new ad-libs or improv came up, then they would rework the script. And on the day of shooting, they would kind of go off of this new script. So this banter that you hear is very interesting. Another thing that kind of happens is, I forget the exact number, but it's somewhere in the high 200s or maybe low 300s, the number of times that the word fuck is said in the film. It was the highest for a very long time. It's not anymore, but
That's pretty funny.
Apparently, I think that there was only 70 uses of the word in the original script, and we end up with somewhere around 300, and more than half of them are by Pesci. And apparently Pesci asked his mom what she thought of the movie. She said that she thought he did a good job, but asked why he had to curse so much.
It's part of his character.
Yeah.
Gosh. Mom.
Mafia. Mom.
I'm
in the mafia.
Gosh.
They're supposed to swear. Ugh. We've only talked about the interesting parts of this film. We did a little breakdown, which we haven't done in a while.
We did, yeah.
But let's talk about, at least for a moment, what we think about the movie before we rate it.
Okay.
Because we didn't really do much of that. I really enjoy GoodFellas. Every time I watch it, I enjoy watching it. I liked it better than Raging Bull, which we just recently watched, and Casino before that. I'm a pretty big Scorsese fan. I like a lot of his other films that we're not covering because they don't have Pesci in them, at least right now. It's also considered to be one of the greatest films of all time, just like Raging Bull is, just like Once Upon a Time in America. We started this whole series off with a short podcast just talking about Pesci and how we think it's just crazy how he happens to be involved in all of these
really great
movies.
Or a variety
I
of
think it's
movies.
because he's been able to work with great directors, Scorsese numerous times, Sergio Leone, like it helps to put yourself in good company.
Absolutely.
But I'm a pretty big fan of this movie. I think as far as mob movies go, it's my favorite. I thought Once Upon a Time in America was great, but I still think that there's no competing against this. I know that Godfather fans out there might disagree with me, but I don't particularly like the pacing of Godfather. So sue me, that's fine. I know for a fact that I like Goodfellas.
I really liked GoodFellas as well. Definitely saw a lot of likeness with Casino, but it had a lot of things that Casino was missing. It seemed more put together. The story was there, even though it was still based on true events and just a series of events. It seemed like there was a beginning, a middle, and an end that we could follow. I think it also helped that Ray Liotta was one main star. I don't know why, but I feel like Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci were just accessories, just like decoration for the story that was based around Ray Liotta. And I could really get behind Ray Liotta up until the end. I think my favorite character, though, was Polly.
Supporting characters, so I get that. Like they're.
But it just makes me want to watch The Sopranos again. If you're down for that, we should do that.
I agree. I think Pesci obviously won the Oscar, so a phenomenal job there. We see the beginning of his range in Raging Bull, and then he really shows it in this movie. And then he shows it again in Casino, but I think that he would have won for that role in Casino if people hadn't thought it was so similar. The fact is you have the same director directing a similar film. You have both the director who co-wrote and the other writer of Casino. Of course they're going to be kind of similar. The subject matter is similar, but it doesn't take away from the fact that
They're both good.
They're good, but two separate movies. I also think that Ray Liotta, who I think until this time, this might be the 10th or 11th time I've seen this movie, I just noticed is like he really gives a pretty nuanced performance that I don't think I've ever noticed from Ray Liotta before, because I think most of everything else I've seen with Ray Liotta, he's always just a supporting character. And he's the main character here, and we get to see him actually flex a little bit of range, and I really noticed that this time. This was like his big breakout. I mean, before this, like, he was in Something Wild, which was maybe his first real big role. Also a big role for Jeff Daniels. I've never seen Something Wild, but it's one of those films that a lot of people are like, oh, Something Wild, so I feel like we've got to watch that now.
Okay. Young Ray Liotta?
Yeah, he's younger. It's in 86. Yeah.
Young Ray Liotta is pretty handsome.
And I feel like we owe it to Ray Liotta. Unfortunately, Ray Liotta died last May. R.I.P. Ray Liotta. We love you. And you're missed. It's a good role. Also, Paul Sorvino, the guy who plays Paulie, died last March.
He did.
Also, yeah. So, shout out to Paul Sorvino as well. let's rate this bitch.
Before we do that, let's go through all the other ratings that people have given this. So IMDb give it an 8.7. Rotten Tomatoes, the tomato meter is a 96%. Whoo! The audience score is 97%. Clearly a favorite.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
What are you going to give yours?
So I'm going to do something that I didn't think that I was going to do, but I'm going to do it.
12.
I'm gonna bump Once Upon a Time in America down to 11, and I'm gonna give Goodfellas a 12 because, yeah, I'm a huge fan of the movie.
Me too.
Would you stop copying me?
I'm not copying you. It's just good.
Did the same thing last week with Easy Money and Eight Heads.
It's just good.
We've got technically 3 more films. 2 more episodes. Next week we'll be doing Home Alone 1 and 2.
Yay!
And our final week we'll be doing The Super.
Which is not a horror movie.
The Super with Joe Pesci, which is a comedy. Not The Super, and I'm retracting my previous
dickishness.
Retracting my previous dickishness
statements.
When I was picking on my wife for thinking that The Super was a thriller or a horror movie. Apparently, Val Kilmer, just a few years ago, made a film called The Super, where he's a superintendent.
Same synopsis.
And it's a horror film.
But it's a horror thriller.
I had zero idea, because I only knew about this Joe Pesci one.
It's fine. So. Whatever. Thank you for joining us this week. If you are listening to us on YouTube, please hit subscribe and like and comment. If you have any comments,
give us feedback. We'd like to, especially this film or any of them.
Right? This was a great film.
Let us know what you think. Are you a fan of Goodfellas? If you're not, why?
Why?
No, I'm kidding. But yeah, let us know.
Yeah, Goodfellas or The Godfather? Right below.
Well, you've never seen The Godfather.
I haven't.
We have to watch that.
Oh, you just outed me in front of all these people.
Well, I've outed you previous episodes, so that's fine. Also, you can give us feedback anywhere you listen to the podcast. If you didn't watch it on YouTube, depending on where you listen, you can rate and review us and leave a comment. We're on pretty much any platform that you can think of out there. If you're on social media, go ahead and check us out. We're at Stellar Alignment Podcast, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and mostly Instagram. That's the best place to look for us. We're just 2 people, so it's hard to keep up with all of these platforms. But hit us up. Let us know what you think of the movie and also what you think of our podcast.
Our talking.
Next week, we'll be discussing Home Alone 1 and 2. So we'll see you then. Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye. Next week, we'll be discussing Home Alone 1 and 2.
Stick around.
Next week? Stick around next week?
Stick around?